In July 2020, Arsenal had just beaten the two best teams in England within the space of 3 days. The Gunners ended the chaotic 2019-20 campaign, having lost only 4 Premier League games from January 1st onwards, with 8 wins from their last 12 Premier League fixtures, and by beating Chelsea at Wembley Stadium in the FA Cup final to claim their first piece of silverware since Arsene Wenger left the club. The narrative surrounding the club was one of excitement and of a long-term vision. Clearly there had been an uptick in the team's fortunes since Mikel Arteta's arrival, and it appeared as though the Arsenal players had bought into the way in which the Spaniard wanted them to play. Just 5 months on, Arsenal have now lost 4 of their last 6 Premier League outings, drawing the other 2 in an abysmal run of form which leaves them 15th in the division, 4 points behind the likes of Newcastle United and Crystal Palace. Once again, Arsenal are being described as a club in crisis. That system that the Arsenal players look to have bought into now appears almost entirely toothless, teams have learned how to counter it effectively, and Arteta seems to be lacking any kind of plan B when it comes to either his pre-game decision making or his in-game management. It's all a bit of a mess, and some Arsenal fans have been left wondering how things have gone so wrong in such a short amount of time. So today, that is exactly what we're going to take a look at, just what on earth is going on at Arsenal. Typically when I make videos for this What on Earth is Going On series, I focus on clubs who are in more perilous situations than Arsenal and are in a later stage of a long-term decline than the Gunners are at this moment in time. Take Hull City, Cruzeiro or even Schalke for example, all of whom I have made in-depth videos about, and all of whom have circumstances that are of a much more dire nature than Arsenal's, who some eternally optimistic Gunners fans might argue are just in the midst of a poor run of form. I've had so many requests to make this video though, and I do believe that there are enough long-term substantive issues facing the North Londoners for me to oblige and give the thumbs up to those demands. There are 2 elements to the Arsenal situation to talk about. One is their ownership and boardroom, and the other is the club's management, playing squad, performances and results. I'll try to cover both in this video, but there is an awful lot to touch upon in terms of the former, so I may well make an entire video dedicated solely to Arsenal's ownership and management and boardroom level issues in the future, so as to do it justice. On the pitch though, Arsenal's problems are just as plentiful, if a little easier to understand. It's worth remembering that under Unai Emery, Arsenal's primary issues had been in terms of conceding goals. In the 2018-19 season, under Emery, the Gunners finished 5th in the Premier League, just 1 point behind Tottenham in 4th and 4 ahead of Manchester United in 6th. Going forward, Emery's men were a real threat, with only Manchester City and Liverpool, who won 98 and 97 points respectively that season, scoring more goals than them. Defensively, however, the Spaniards' side were often found wanting, shipping 51 goals, meanwhile Chelsea and Tottenham only conceded 39 goals apiece that season, and even the likes of Everton and Newcastle didn't concede as many goals as Arsenal. It was a theme that continued at the start of the 2019-20 campaign, with the Gunners only keeping 2 clean sheets in their opening 13 Premier League games prior to Unai Emery losing his job. Interim boss Freddie Ljungberg equally couldn't stop the rot, managing only 1 clean sheet during his 7 games in charge, making it increasingly difficult for Arsenal to win games. Upon his appointment then, it made perfect sense for Mikel Arteta to put an emphasis on improving Arsenal's back line, introducing a more rigid system in which players could better understand their roles, and ultimately attempting to concede fewer goals. Indeed, that is exactly what Mikel Arteta did, and it worked. From an average of 1.5 goals conceded per game in the 20 games prior to his arrival that season, Arsenal averaged only 0.94 goals conceded per game during the remaining 18 Premier League matches on Arteta's watch. Whilst Arsenal had become more resilient at the back, other than in Arteta's first month in charge, they had not sacrificed any of their goal-scoring prowess. There were reasons to be cheerful then for Arsenal fans, in terms of a work in progress. Arteta had achieved this newfound defensive strength by implementing a 3-4-3 formation, which could become a 5-2-3 when the Gunners were defending. The system covered for the flaws of players like David Luiz, who equally flourished in a back 3 at Chelsea under Antonio Conte, whilst maintaining Arsenal's threat on the break with the pace of Lacazette, Aubameyang, and either Pepe, Saka, Nketiah, or whoever else Arteta chose to play as part of that forward line, along with the attacking intent of the team's 2 wing-backs. Following Arsenal's struggles during the early parts of this season, I have seen some people retrospectively stating that Arsenal never improved under Arteta last season and that they just fluked a few lucky results in the cup competitions which papered over the cracks. Personally, I don't believe that was the case. I think Arteta introduced structure, a system that functioned, and he had players, most notably in the form of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who could finish the limited number of chances that his team did create. From the early impressions of Mikel Arteta in first-team management, and we must acknowledge that these are still extremely early days in the management career of a very young and inexperienced head coach, I think this is exactly where Arteta flourishes. To me, it seems as though Arteta is a detail-orientated coach and tactician with a focus on defensive solidity that was not just born out of Arsenal's needs upon his arrival, but actually represented what appears to be his approach to the game. Again, just from the early indications, it does not appear to me that Arteta is particularly personable or blessed in the arts of man management in terms of motivation, a little like his mentor, Pep Guardiola. In many respects, Arsenal are actually very reminiscent of Guardiola's side so far this season, just with a greatly inferior squad of players. This Arsenal team looks laborious, one-dimensional, and lacking in any kind of flair, tempo or invention in the final third, much like Man City at times this season, but totally different to what we saw from the Citizens for most of Arteta's time as Guardiola's deputy from 2017 to 2019, when they carved out chances at will and seemed capable of playing with a near permanent purposeful zeal for a full 90 minutes. The lack of movement, interplay and identifiable patterns being created by Arsenal's forward players, their front three in particular, is surprising given Arteta's footballing education. There is no doubt that Arsenal have some excellent attacking talent, but they appear to be shackled at the moment, struggling to receive the kind of service that they flourish on. It is evident that some of Arsenal's biggest problems, as they have done for more than a decade, lie in central midfield, where there is a lack of both strength and creativity. Consequently, there appears to be an enormous emphasis placed on creating chances from wide areas. Seemingly much to Mikel Arteta's surprise, his game plan of crossing the ball all game into strikers who aren't very good at heading the ball doesn't seem to be working. Who'd have thought it? Of course, it is easy to make sly digs like that when in reality we have seen at Liverpool that it is possible to score plenty of goals without necessarily having the more gifted or creative type of midfielders, a significant reliance on balls into the box, and no traditional centre forwards who are dominant in the air. However, the difference between Arsenal and Liverpool is currently akin to the difference between Diego Maradona at the 1986 World Cup and this bloke that I play football with on a Wednesday night who wears Abercrombie & Fitch jogging bottoms instead of football shorts. What may be even more concerning for Arsenal fans though is the fact that Mikel Arteta does appear to be somewhat delusional with regards to their current plight. In press conferences after Arsenal's defeat against Wolves and their draw against Leeds United, he has described matches that seemingly only he has borne witness to. Certainly, nothing resembling the games that I had just watched. And he doesn't seem delusional in the Pep Guardiola, I'm lying to you to protect my players, but the second you're gone, I'm going to crucify them kind of way, which would be a little less concerning, as evidenced by the fact that he wasted no time throwing Nicola Pepe under the bus for his foolish red card against Leeds United, which rather suggested that protecting his players in press conferences is not his primary concern. I think it's worth pointing out that Arsenal do have, in my opinion, the least talented group of players amongst the traditional top six, and you could make a case for Leicester City, Everton, and possibly even Wolves having a starting 11 of a similar calibre to Arsenal's when everyone is fit. But it is not a squad which should be languishing in 15th place and in the midst of a relegation battle. There are plenty of Arsenal fans who feel they have already seen enough, and the situation is dire enough to call for Arteta's head. But what kind of admission would that be from the club's hierarchy? Stan Kroenke's regime, since taking full control of the club, has already been a tumultuous one. There has been the end of an era with Arsene Wenger, the appointment of Unai Emery, the sacking of Unai Emery, the appointment of Arteta, his bright start, and now this new crisis. Ultimately though, Unai Emery is a much more qualified candidate to manage Arsenal than Mikel Arteta at this moment in time. The decision to sack Emery and appoint Arteta can only really be justified by the Arsenal board buying into a certain identity and long-term philosophy that Arteta was capable of implementing. And it is surely in the very nature of a long-term appointment that you have to employ the successful candidate for a reasonably long period of time. If Arsenal sack Arteta now, which I most certainly wouldn't rule out, having already given him a load of money to spend in the transfer market, Arsenal will confirm what many already suspect, that they are clueless from the top down. That brings us neatly to the top of Arsenal, otherwise known as Stan Kroenke, and as I said, there is a lot to unpick here. More than enough for a standalone video, so I will have to be terse with this one. Kroenke is a man who went from being quite successful during his early to mid-20s to eye-wateringly wealthy in 1974 when he married Anne Walton, an heiress to the Walmart fortune that was founded by her father and uncle. Kroenke has been involved at Arsenal for the last 13 years, having first acquired a 9.9% stake in the club in 2007, which he looked to quickly increase during the years that followed. In 2008, Kroenke added to his shareholding and joined the Arsenal board of directors. In 2011, Kroenke took a controlling 62.89% interest in the club. And in 2018, Kroenke paid £600 million to Alisher Usmanov to take complete control at the Emirates. When Kroenke first became Arsenal's major shareholder, the club were Champions League regulars under Arsene Wenger, but had just fallen off the pace in terms of fighting for the Premier League title. Throughout the period either side of Kroenke's major investment in Arsenal in 2011, the Gunners exercised a far greater degree of frugality than any of the other teams around them at the top end of the Premier League table, often citing the club's move from Highbury to the Emirates as justification for this lack of significant investment, particularly in the transfer market. Arsene Wenger has previously stated that keeping Arsenal competitive during this period and maintaining their place in the Champions League was the best work that he ever did at Arsenal, not his more trophy-laden period in the early 2000s, which included the Gunners' famous Invincible campaign. The Frenchman wasn't without his critics though, and Kroenke's early years, it could be argued, were defined by the choice to either stick or twist with regards to the man who had led Arsenal since 1996. He chose to stick up until the club dropped out of the Champions League for 2 successive seasons, at which point Wenger and Arsenal parted ways. That was in the summer of 2018, the same summer that Kroenke bought out Usmanov and took complete control of the club. It is important to note that Arsenal is not Stan Kroenke's first love. I mean, his first love appears to be money, but that is beside the point. Even in a sporting context, football is not Kroenke's first love, and one of the primary gripes among Arsenal fans is Kroenke's emotional detachment from the club. Nicknamed Silent Stan and painted as a sort of shady character lurking in the shadows, Kroenke hasn't always been particularly transparent in helping Arsenal fans understand his decision-making in the Emirates or the direction in which the club is heading. The perception of Kroenke during his time at Arsenal has been of a man lacking in ambition, unmoved by the team's success or failure in terms of trophies, and motivated primarily by ensuring that Arsenal is a financially viable operation for the Kroenke Group. Since Kroenke doesn't appear to take much of a hands-on approach at the Emirates and doesn't seem to have a particularly great understanding of English football in general, the fate of the club is very much dependent on getting the right people in through the door to call the shots. And again, Kroenke's record on this front is a little more than dubious. During Arsene Wenger's time at the club, the Frenchman naturally had a major influence on the day-to-day running of the club, financial decisions, recruitment, and all key decision-making, meaning Arsenal was structured a little differently to most modern clubs. Nonetheless, the continued employment of unpopular chief executive Ivan Gazidis drew the ire of some Arsenal supporters long before Wenger had even left. Not only did Gazidis keep his job, but when Wenger left, he was the man put in charge of overseeing the club's huge transition into the post-Wenger era, and key appointments to a number of roles, Raul Sanllehi as the club's new head of football relations and Sven Mislintat as head of recruitment, chief among them. Within a couple of months of those appointments, Gazidis himself was offered a job at AC Milan and jumped ship. Most Arsenal fans wouldn't mourn the loss of Gazidis in 2018, but it meant that the man who was supposed to spearhead Arsenal into the challenging but exciting new era was gone, and chaos has ensued ever since. Sanllehi, for example, who was promoted when Gazidis departed despite having only just arrived at the club, was rather swiftly removed from his post in the summer just gone. The constant turmoil behind the scenes has led to a lack of consistency at boardroom and executive level at Arsenal, and it's one which is particularly evident in the transfer market. Whilst Arsenal were famously frugal for about a decade after their move from Highbury to the Emirates, that simply hasn't been the case since the summer of 2016. The club spent over £100 million on transfers during the summer 2016 window on the likes of Granit Xhaka, Shkodran Mustafi and Lucas Perez. Meanwhile, they brought in less than £10 million over the same period in player sales. During the 2017-18 campaign, Arsenal saw really significant moves both in and out of the club, with the departures of Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain, Alexis Sanchez, Theo Walcott and Olivier Giroud, countered by the arrivals of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Alexander Lacazette and Henrik Mkhitaryan. Significant expenditure has been made every summer since 2016, whether it be on Nicola Pepe in 2019 for £72 million or Thomas Partey in the summer just gone for £45 million. All told, Arsenal have spent somewhere in the region of £530 million since the summer of 2016, which is more than Liverpool over the same period. Whilst Arsenal spent years having one of the best balance sheets in the Premier League, albeit not necessarily one of the best teams, now they don't have either. In the 2019 annual accounts, Arsenal posted losses of £32 million, their first loss-making year since 2002, and the joint fourth worst figures posted by any team in the Premier League over the same period. As with all Premier League teams, Arsenal have three sources of revenue: TV money, commercial revenue, and matchday income. Arsenal's TV revenue has lagged behind the rest of the top six over the last few years due to their poor performances in the Premier League. Arsenal have now gone 4 successive seasons without qualifying for the Champions League, which has seen a significant dent to their TV revenue, since there is a huge gulf between Champions League and Europa League TV money. Whilst Tottenham have grown their income via European TV rights by £74 million over the last 3 years, Arsenal's European TV revenue has actually fallen by £6 million over the same period, a gap of £80 million over a remarkably short period of time between the two North London clubs. TV money isn't the only area in which Arsenal lag behind though. Despite having enormous global support thanks to their success around the turn of the millennium, Arsenal have failed to capitalise on that support from an economic standpoint in the same way in which a team like Manchester United have been able to. In fact, that is an understatement, and a pretty sizable one at that. Arsenal's commercial revenue trails all of the rest of the Premier League's top six, and by some distance, including Tottenham, who have made up a huge amount of ground on the Gunners in this respect in recent years as well. Arsenal's commercial revenue for 2018-19 was just £111 million, compared to £279 million at Manchester United, £227 million at Manchester City, £188 million at Liverpool, £180 million at Chelsea, and £162 million at Tottenham. The only area in which Arsenal really succeed in relation to their top six rivals is matchday revenue, where the size and cost of watching football at the Emirates has made the Gunners' new ground a major cash cow for the club. Arsenal's matchday revenue in the most recent set of accounts stood at £96 million, the highest figure in the Premier League, ahead of £95 million at Tottenham and £90 million at Manchester United. This is obviously a good thing for Arsenal from a financial perspective in general, but in the unlikely event of something like a global pandemic that means fans can't attend games and completely wipes out that entire sector of income, you would be in some serious bother. Oh yeah. Of course, the fact that Arsenal's broadcast and commercial income is so poor in comparison to the Premier League's other so-called top six further compounds their problems. Whilst Manchester United can weather the storm of a huge hit to matchday income due to their enormous commercial revenue, and other teams like Chelsea or Manchester City are simply less reliant on matchday revenue all year round, it means Arsenal will feel the pain of COVID particularly harshly. That is unwelcome news for a club that saw a £32 million loss in the last set of accounts, despite the largest matchday revenue in the division, and proceeded to increase their wage budget by a considerable amount, sack their manager and their coaching staff, and bring in some expensive signings during the last 12 months. The excellent Swiss Ramble on Twitter estimates that if stadiums remain empty or largely empty for the entirety of this season, Arsenal will lose around £184 million of revenue over the next 2 years. And even if full crowds were allowed back in next week, which obviously won't happen, the club would still be looking at a loss of revenue in excess of £125 million. Fortunately for Arsenal, their owner, however disinterested he may be, is very wealthy, and it certainly is not in his best interest to see the club go under or anything like that, as is a serious concern for a number of clubs across the globe during this time. Ultimately though, Arsenal cannot afford to keep spending without securing Champions League qualification and getting full houses back at the Emirates every week. Two things that seem like the delusional dreams of a mad fantasist at this moment in time. Already, Arsenal are one of the most indebted clubs in the Premier League, and only Manchester United, whose owners literally leveraged debt in order to buy the club, have spent more on financing their debts, so effectively interest payments, than the Gunners in the Premier League over the last 5 years. All in all, it doesn't paint a particularly pleasant picture for Arsenal, and with Kroenke's hands-off approach, question marks remain over who is setting and maintaining standards at the club. One of the primary factors in Mikel Arteta's appointment was to set standards in terms of discipline and application among the first-team squad, something that has unravelled a little during the early parts of this season, but who is ensuring that there is discipline and consistency at executive level. For a number of years now, Arsenal seem to have employed a sort of scattergun approach in the transfer market, and it has left them to get burnt on all too many occasions. Now they are paying the price for that lack of foresight and due diligence, exacerbated by the total obliteration of their hefty matchday income. Mikel Arteta seemingly still has the support of Arsenal's owners and directors, but whether they, or Arteta, retain the support of the Arsenal fans is an altogether very different question. There are so many other aspects of the Arsenal situation that I would have loved to have touched upon. I mean, I've somehow gone this entire video without even mentioning Mesut Ozil, the Premier League's highest earner, who isn't even in a Premier League squad, but I'm aware that this video is already rather lengthy, and maybe we will touch on that hot potato in a more ownership-centric video at some point in the future. Thank you all for watching today's video though, I hope you enjoyed it. Smash the like button if that was the case, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and remember to double check that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. And you can also find me on Twitter or Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens, should you wish to do so.